There were 2,166 auctions held across Australia on Saturday, returning a clearance rate of 56.5%. Sydney held 841 auctions with a clearance rate of about 55%, and there were also roughly 1,700 private sales across New South Wales. Melbourne held 823 auctions with a clearance rate of about 62%. There were 1,041 private sales in Victoria. Brisbane held 75 auctions with a clearance rate of just under 43%. There were about 1,150 private sales in Queensland. Adelaide held 85 auctions with a much higher clearance rate of about 69%. There were roughly 260 private sales in South Australia. The ACT held 80 auctions with a clearance rate of about 44%. There were 111 private sales in Canberra. And Perth, it only held 2 auctions, but there were almost 500 private sales across Western Australia. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Anne Flaherty from REA Group. And thanks for your time. Clearance rates, I mean, how really have they been tracking for the past couple of months?
Well, we've actually seen clearance rates start to come down over the past few months, and over the past couple of weeks in particular, we've really started to see them dip a bit. And I think the main reason for this is the sheer volume of homes that have been up for auction at the moment. There's a lot of choice out there for buyers, and of course, vendors going to auction are competing for those buyers.
Yeah, clearly some capital cities have much higher clearance rates than others. I mean, Adelaide there at almost 70%. Just talk about the strength of where in the country is doing really well right now.
Well, as you mentioned, Adelaide remains an incredibly hot market. We have seen it among one of the strongest performing markets for well over a year now, and that clearance rate is very much indicative of that. It's kind of unusual in a way because Melbourne is where we typically see the most auctions and where we also typically see the strongest clearance rates. So the fact that we've seen a lower clearance rate in Melbourne really points to the fact that that is not as strong a market at the moment. Perth, of course, is a very strong market, but of course in Perth we typically don't see very many auctions at all. So clearance rates there can't really be used to sort of get a gauge on the market over there.
The past few weeks there's been a couple of public holidays which have kind of interrupted the auction market a little bit, and there's been a few less listings than expected. But what are you expecting over the next couple of weeks in the lead up to Christmas? Is there going to be a lot more stock available out there for buyers?
Absolutely. And actually, this coming week could be the busiest week of the year so far for auctions. Certainly, we've got more properties scheduled for auction this week than we've seen in any other week so far, and it might just be the busiest week we see this year. So both in Sydney and Melbourne, we've got around 1,500 auctions happening each. It's above the level we were seeing at the same time last year, and of course, well above the level that we were seeing around a month ago.
All right, so a pretty big build-up as we get towards Christmas. When does the market then sort of go into a bit of a holding pattern, and when does it restart again in the new year?
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens this year. Typically, we usually see the market slow down a lot, really from the start of December. But actually, last year and the year before, we actually saw the selling season extend a little longer. Certainly from mid-December, throughout January, we wouldn't expect to see that many homes on the market. And I think that what that means is for those people who are looking to sell this year, we're going to see a really strong push to do so. And similarly for buyers, there's a huge amount of options out there at the moment, but of course, from around a month's time, we're going to really start to see the total number of homes available drop off significantly, and we're not really going to see that much choice out there for buyers until we start getting towards the end of January, February, before the market really starts to pick up again.
Just looking at the REA Group website, how much traffic are you getting at the moment and interest from people going online?
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot of interest, particularly in those stronger markets that I mentioned. Interestingly, we're seeing a really strong volume of properties for sale really across the board. But in some markets, we're continuing to see that strong buyer demand drive the average time it takes for a home to sell down. Not in every market. So, for example, in Canberra, in Melbourne, we're still seeing properties take longer to sell. That buyer demand hasn't really picked up as strongly as that supply. But then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum in Adelaide, in Perth, we're continuing to see very strong levels of buyer demand, particularly from investors looking to get into those markets, which is driving average time on site down in those cities.
And when you look at the large amount of stock on the market at the moment, what does that mean in regards to price growth for, say, the month of November and December this year? Could we see prices a little bit flatter just due to the fact there's so many places for sale?
Well, we have actually seen across the board the speed at which home prices are rising has slowed. And I think a huge number of properties for sale has that effect, of course, because with more choice out there, there's less competition. So buyers have a little bit more space to move in a lot of markets. I do think that the speed at which property prices are going to rise is going to remain, relatively subdued through to the end of the year as a result of that increase in choice out there. But I think, of course, again, it always comes down to the specific market you're looking in, because in some markets, even though we've seen a huge increase in supply, that buyer demand has more than kept up. So overall, we're seeing strong website traffic, which I guess is, very good news for those people who are selling at the moment.
Anne Flaherty, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.